This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Trump has had a busy start to his second term. He's fired thousands of federal workers, cut funding to anything with the word DEI in it, and insisted he wants to annex Canada, to name just a few things. You might expect all this to have provoked a furious reaction from Democrats, but they've been remarkably muted in their opposition, and perhaps the most visible display of protest we've seen so far was when the Democrats held up paddles with grumpy slogans on them during Trump's address to Congress in early March. Unsurprisingly, voters aren't impressed, and the Democrat brand has cratered. In recent polls by NBC News and CNN, the party has seen its lowest ever approval ratings, 27% and 29% respectively, in large part because frustrated Democrats say they disapprove of their own leadership. Conversely, Trump's approval ratings have actually held up better than our viewers might think. According to Nate Silver's poll aggregator, while Trump is now in negative territory, with more Americans saying they disapprove of his leadership than approve, his approval rating is still in the high 40s, and voters generally have a more favourable view of the Republican Party than the Democrats. So in this video, we thought we'd take a look at where the Democrats might go from here, and what we should expect the party to look like when, or if, it recovers from the aftershock of 2024. Who's the best politician right now? Hear our thoughts and argue with us on our podcast, The World Leader Leaderboard. Find it over on the TLDR Podcast YouTube channel or in your favourite podcast app. So, as we see it, there are basically two questions that the Democrats need to answer. First, how do they oppose Trump? i.e., how do they convince voters that Trump is bad? And second, what should their policy platform be? i.e., how do they convince voters that Democrats are good? Let's start with the first question, how to oppose Trump. Broadly speaking, there are two schools of thought here. First, we have who we might call loud Democrats, and then we have quiet Democrats. Loud Democrats argue that the Democrats need to be more vocal, to be angrier in their criticism of Trump. After all, Trump is doing some pretty radical stuff that Democrats really don't like, firing thousands of federal workers, threatening to impeach inconvenient judges, and slashing Biden's big climate initiatives. On top of all the domestic stuff, Trump's foreign policy is almost the opposite of Biden's. While neither of them like China's trade practices, Biden was a committed Atlanticist who liked talking about democracies versus autocracies. Trump, on the other hand, thinks the EU was made to screw America and has no qualms with buddying up to autocrats. Anyway, loud Democrats point to all this and argue that, in not being vocal enough in their criticism, Democrats are essentially letting Trump get away with it. Quiet Democrats, on the other hand, think the loud Dems are making three mistakes. First, they know that most voters, and especially the Democrat skeptic voters they need to win back, just aren't persuaded by the whole Trump is a threat to democracy argument, as 2024 demonstrated. Second, they worry that constant outrage just overwhelms voters and prevents Democrats from actually being able to draw voters' attention when they really need to. Quiet Democrats instead argue that Democrats should save up their outrage and express it selectively, so that when they do, voters actually notice. But third, quiet Democrats argue that Trump is doing enough damage to himself, and that shouting about it risks turning Trump's failures into partisan contests. To give a concrete example, quiet Democrats worry that shouting too much about DOGE risks inviting a wider argument about the size of the state, with the Democrats forced into saying they like a big state and the Republicans saying they like a small state, which is probably the more popular position with the median voter. Quiet Democrats instead suggest that Democrats should just let Elon Musk cut away at the federal government, and when something inevitably breaks, the blame will be laid exclusively at Trump's feet. Anyway, the disagreement between quiet and loud Democrats was made glaringly apparent earlier this month, when Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who's probably more on the quiet side of things, decided to vote with Republicans to keep the government funded through September, instead of withholding votes and threatening a government shutdown. This is a defensible position, but loud Democrats in Congress thought it was just too passive, given this was basically the only leverage they had over Trump, and polling suggests most Democrat voters agree. Anyway, aside from how to oppose Trump, the second question for Democrats is how they should recalibrate their policy platform after 2024. There are some more left-wing Democrats who actually think the Democrats should basically stick with their policies from last year, or even move to the left. These Democrats argue that Trump only won because of a global inflationary episode, which is why basically every incumbent lost last year, usually by larger margins than the Democrats, and that pivoting towards the centre risks looking insincere or dry and technocratic when Democrats need enthusiasm. There's also a sense among these Democrats that Trump, who is less popular than almost any previous president, will be so unpopular by 2028 that Democrats won't need to do anything to win, and so should just stick with their current policy platform to avoid infighting. Nonetheless, recent Gallup polling suggests a plurality of Democrats think the party needs to move to the centre if it wants to win back power, not least because moderate Democrats massively outperformed their liberal peers last year. However, what Democrats actually mean when they talk about the centre is very much unclear. This presumably means moving to the right on cultural issues, but it's not really clear what this means for economic policy, which is voters' number one issue at the moment. After all, what is a centrist economic policy in the current American context? Presumably, Democrats don't mean a return to the neoliberal programme of tax cuts and deregulation. Equally, balancing the budget, which is how Bill Clinton restored Democrat credibility on the economy back in the 90s, doesn't look easy. The deficit is currently running at 6% of GDP, double what Clinton inherited, so balancing it would require significantly steeper tax hikes or spending cuts. The big idea in this space at the moment is what's become known as abundance liberalism. In short, abundance liberals argue that the left's obsession with process and protecting various minority groups has meant that Democrat administrations don't actually get anything done. Houses are more expensive in Democrat-run areas than Republican-run areas because restrictive regulation prevent building. Texas builds more renewable energy than California for similar reasons, and Democrats are famously bad at building public transport, despite their enthusiasm for it. Abundance liberals argue that the state is still needed to achieve progressive ideals of affordable housing, clean energy, and accessible public transport, but that it needs to be unleashed by deregulation, even if that means less explicit protections or guarantees for certain minority groups. Ultimately, there's no easy answer to either of these questions, but Democrats would be well advised to make up their collective minds very soon. At TLDR News, we're always trying to help you learn more about the world around you. Luckily for us, our sponsor this week, Brilliant, shares this same commitment, with thousands of lessons in maths, science, programming, and AI. And not only that, their interactive lessons teach you by doing, instead of just asking you to mindlessly memorize stuff. This helps you build your critical thinking skills and become a better thinker. For instance, Brilliant's newly updated maths courses help you establish a strong foundation in algebra. Then helps you build on this, teaching you how to conquer calculus, all while maintaining an emphasis on problem solving and reasoning. The thing I like best about this, though, is that their mathematical courses help you develop your mathematical intuition and fluency, skills that you can use in the real world. As we've told you before, data skills are absolutely necessary for navigating the modern world, and Brilliant is the best way to get them. To try Brilliant for free, visit brilliant.org/TLDR or scan the QR code on screen, or you can click the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription.